It's a celebration of America's freedom. Welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. The Mark Scaringi Show is your place for a weekly discussion on making America great again. The important political and legal issues of the day, a celebration of the Constitution, and traditional American values. Mark is a practicing attorney, a former senatorial candidate, a Donald J. Trump-endorsed delegate, and a defender of the Constitution. His goal? To put America first. And now, celebrating America's freedoms, here's attorney Mark Scaringi.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. And this is the place where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And if you'd like to listen to prior podcasts of the show or check out some great merchandise we have, including our popular Right to Bear Arms muscle shirt and the We're Glad You're Our Neighbor, Just Please Don't Kill Us yard signs and T-shirts, you can take a look at the MarkScaringiShow.com website. And don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more political and legal news throughout the week. And before we get into the big news of the day, I wanted to let you know that I'll be appearing and speaking at the Freedom Fest on Saturday, August 15th from 1 p.m. to 7 p.m. in Kenoi Township Canal Park in Bainbridge, Pennsylvania. There you'll meet fellow freedom fighters and freedom lovers like State Senator Doug Mastriano, State Representative Russ Diamond, the owners of Taste of Sicily, the Italian restaurant in Palmyra in Lebanon County that's been a leader in defying Governor Wolf's illegal and unconstitutional business closure orders, and you'll meet many others. It's a family affair, so bring the kids and celebrate with other freedom lovers throughout central Pennsylvania. And I will head down there myself after next week's show, which ends at 2 o'clock, and then I'll be down there with the family, so come on down and join us. Well, what's new in the news this week? Crazy Uncle Joe Biden. And what's Joe done now, you may ask? Joe Biden is everyone's favorite crazy uncle. Well, he stepped in it again. And this time it was an interview with Lulu Garcia Navarro of the National Public Radio, a.k.a. the People's National Radio. And Garcia Navarro, well, she asked Joe Biden this question. She asked, are you going to re-engage with Cuba? I am specifically wondering about the Florida communities that are incredibly interested in the Cuba issue and see status given to Venezuelans while Cubans get deported. So that's the question from Garcia Navarro of the National Public Radio. What was Joe Biden's response? Well, he says yes, yes a couple of times while she's trying to ask the question, yet he offers no explanation whatsoever about the specific issue he was asked about, that is, the immigration status given to Venezuelans while Cubans get deported. Apparently that's a big issue to National Public Radio and its listeners. Biden obviously knows nothing about that. So instead of answering the question, Biden decides to, lecture the NPR audience on the difference between black Americans and the, quote, Latino community, end quote. Why? Who knows? It just popped into Joe's head, and out it comes. So Biden says, in response to this question about immigration status given to Venezuelans while Cubans get deported, Biden's answer is, well, unlike the African-American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community. What's he talking about? Who knows? He's just trying to make up the time with this lecture about race and diversity because he can't answer the question about apparently the differing response by the U.S. immigration authorities involving Venezuelans and Cubans. But in doing so, in coming up with this brief lecture about the difference between African Americans and Latinos in America, Biden reveals what he thinks about black Americans. He thinks of them as one monolithic group based upon their race. and says essentially they all think the same. So all black Americans are the same according to Joe Biden. But that for whatever reason, Biden believes Latino Americans, well, they have more diversity of thought, one assumes. He doesn't really explain what he means by this nutty statement. But one could conclude he means diversity of thought, of opinion about political issues or issues involving immigration, because that's, after all, what the question was. Although why one would respond by talking about the African American community and the Latino community and their differences is beyond me and obviously beyond Joe Biden. But it revealed that Biden thinks of black Americans as one group and of one thought, basically. And he's essentially saying that millions of black Americans, they're all the same. And they all think alike. And so essentially Joe Biden is taking black Americans and their votes for granted. You know, this is the way the left thinks about race. It categorizes individual human beings who are all individual by definition and different. He categorizes them all into racial and ethnic groups and then assumes they all think alike, they all have the same needs, they all have the same thoughts and beliefs, or at least according to Joe Biden, all blacks do. He doesn't pontificate about white Americans. We do know that Biden believes Latino Americans have diversity of thought and beliefs and opinions, but in contradistinction, we know that Joe Biden believes that black Americans don't. This is a real problem for Joe Biden. The constant statements that he makes that reveal his inherently racist way of thinking about the American people. And this is why Joe Biden snapped back at Charlemagne the God, the black talk radio host who was not automatically jumping on board the Biden campaign train. It's now a famous or an infamous interview of just a week or two ago. And during the interview, Biden snapped back at Charlemagne the God for not jumping on the Joe Biden campaign train. Biden said, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. Now, to me, this is a horrifying statement revealing Joe Biden's racism. Biden has the audacity to assume that all blacks are voting for him. And any black who does not vote for him, well, is not black. You know, this is a form of racism. Biden's not saying that he despises or hates black Americans. He's not saying that. It's not that type of racism. But it is a form of racism. Merriam-Webster's dictionary defines racism as a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority or inferiority of a particular race. That's the dictionary definition of racism according to Merriam-Webster. So when Biden says that all blacks think alike, and if you're a black who thinks differently, then you're not black, well, that is the definition of racism. Biden is showing that he believes that race is the primary determinant of human traits. In this case, the human trait is the way black human beings think about politics and political issues. Now, Biden may not think this about all racial and ethnic groups, as I explained earlier. For example, he omits Latinos. He doesn't talk about whites. But we know Joe Biden thinks this about blacks. And the question is, does Biden believe blacks are inferior to Latinos because blacks are a monolith and Latinos enjoy diversity of thought? That is a logical question that results from Joe Biden's statement to Charlemagne the God that if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. I think the answer to the question, does Biden believe blacks are inferior to Latinos because blacks are a monolith and Latinos enjoy diversity of thought? I think the answer is probably yes. I think that's a reasonable conclusion to draw from what Joe Biden says. And so the more and more that Joe Biden talks about race and ethnicity, the deeper the hole he digs for himself. We're going to talk more about crazy Uncle Joe Biden. Is he a racist? When we return from this brief commercial break, you're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now, more of Mark Scaringi on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show. This is your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism, and this is the place where we talk about the important legal and political issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And you're welcome to call in at 717-540-0580. That's 717-540-0580. The topic of the day is, our crazy Uncle Joe Biden a racist? That is the topic of today, and we've listened to some of his statements that he made to the Black Talk Radio host Charlemagne the God. And Charlemagne wasn't jumping on board the Joe Biden express train to Election Day victory. Charlemagne the God has some reservations about Joe Biden as an advocate for the black community. That's how Charlemagne the God would describe it, pointing to Joe Biden's history of supporting the crime bill back in the early 90s as one of the potential impediments to Charlemagne the God getting on board in support of Biden's election. Biden shoots back, if you have a problem figuring out whether you're for me or Trump, then you ain't black. And more recently, just a day or two ago, Biden explained to the Latina interviewer on National Public Radio that unlike the African American community, with notable exceptions, the Latino community is an incredibly diverse community. So here Joe Biden is telling us that all black Americans are the same. They all think alike, certainly about politics, political issues, and candidates. I don't think there's any escaping that logical conclusion, which is what Joe Biden meant by those two comments that he made. And so Joe Biden is now telling us that he believes all black Americans are the same. And that's posed the question, is Joe Biden a racist? And we looked at the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of racism, a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities. So it's very likely Biden is saying all blacks think alike, with notable exceptions. He doesn't define what he means by notable exceptions, but so race is the primary determinant of the human trait in blacks, which is how they think about politics. So here we have Joe Biden fitting the definition of a racist. And this is nothing new. These statements, Joe Biden has made statements throughout the course of his career that a reasonable person could conclude evidence his racism against black Americans. Remember back in 1977, then a young United States Senator, Joe Biden, fought vigorously against against busing to be used as a tool to integrate America's public schools, to racially integrate them. Joe Biden said in 1977, unless we do something about this, my children are going to grow up in a jungle, the jungle being a racial jungle, with tensions having built up so high that it's going to explode at some point. And Joe didn't want his kids involved in that racial jungle of the integrated schools of the Wilmington public school system. So there we have Joe Biden making some pretty patently obvious racist statements, yet he is, for whatever reason, the darling of the liberal Democratic Party of today. And so that's where Joe Biden is. And you're welcome to call in and tell me whether or not you think Joe Biden is a racist. You can call in 717-540-0580. But I wanted to just speak more broadly about Biden's understanding of race. And when he characterizes or categorizes Americans by their race or ethnicity, this is a collectivist, a racial, ethnic categorization. And that is antithetical to Americanism. We have to remember that America was founded upon the rights of the individual and not the collective. That in America, you are judged by your character and by your individual accomplishments and failures, not characterizations assigned to your race or ethnic group or the accomplishments or failures of your race or ethnic group. The worst attribute of the founding of America is that our founding fathers did not extend these basic principles of individualism, individual rights, and the importance on the individual, and equal protection under the law to African slaves. And that's a stain on the honor of America, on our history. But it's being perpetuated by Joe Biden and the Democratic Party today, that black Americans are not individuals, that they don't have individual thoughts, that they don't have independent thoughts, that they only think as a collective group, that they are a collective group who all have the same human traits and thoughts about politics and ideas about political candidates. That's what Joe Biden is saying. That's what he's revealing. Who knows if he even knows what he's saying? He's so far gone mentally. But we know what he's revealing about himself and about the way he thinks of America and of Americans. And what Biden is doing is he's defying what Martin Luther King Jr. said. I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And so sadly, Joe Biden is judging all black Americans by the color of their skin. And he's saying they all think alike, and if they don't vote for him, they're not black. That's as black and white, pardon the expression, as it gets. So we'll open up the phone lines. We'll take some of your calls, and we'll hear your thoughts about whether or not crazy Uncle Joe Biden is a racist. You're welcome to call in 717-540-0580. And we have Richard from Harrisburg. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Yes, sir. Good day to you. It's kind of like you made me think it's like pieces of a puzzle. Here you have what you're talking about. Joe Biden basically said, except for a few exceptions, all black people think alike. And I jumped to I think in 2008, the Biden statement about candidate Barack Obama, when he said, it's storybook, man. Remember when he said they're all clean cut? And I have the thought, so they all think a lot, and when you really think about that full statement he made in 2008, it's storybook, man. He's clean cut. He's basically saying, I think he's saying that all black people smell.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable conclusion to be drawn from that other infamous statement that Biden made back in 2008 that you're bringing up. And he's saying there are notable exceptions, and you're right to point out that Biden believed that Barack Obama was a notable exception to this collectivist idea that Joe Biden has about black Americans, that they think alike and that apparently they look alike. And it is a horrifying statement. It's a horrifying belief to have, to judge an entire group of people based upon their race. And it takes away the individual. It takes away the independence. It takes away the humanity of black Americans. And Joe Biden is unsuspectingly, he doesn't even know what he's saying. He doesn't understand the implications of what he's saying. But it's so harmful, in my mind, to black Americans today to be constantly categorized by the leading Democratic politician today as a group that is apparently, one black individual is apparently unable to or not permitted by Joe Biden to think independently and to make an independent observation or judgment about which candidate he's going to support in the upcoming election. So I think you're right on point, and I appreciate the call.
Well, can I do one more comment?
Yes, go ahead, Richard.
I think another piece of the puzzle, I suspect that if I had all his quotes going back from his time in Washington back to the early 70s, I bet somewhere it's in there, since he said a storybook man, they're clean, as in implying that most or all black people normally are not clean. I bet somewhere back there's a decent chance he made a statement implying that all black people look the same, the old stereotypes. And that's another piece of the puzzle. So I appreciate you taking my call.
Yeah, Richard, thanks for calling. Appreciate that. Now, say that Biden is, it is probably true that Biden has no idea really what he thinks or what he says or even why he thinks the way he does, as I say, because he is so far gone. But he is echoing this liberal groupthink that puts Americans into racial and ethnic groups. And this is not only antithetical to being an American and antithetical to the principles of our founding, as we were talking about, it does great harm to our civilization, to our society, to the American civil union. By putting Americans into categories based upon race or ethnicity, Biden is helping to pull America apart by those same lines. And I think we talked about this in last week's show, that race and ethnicity and groupings of people by race and ethnicity has very easily been one of the most negative forces in the history of the world. People based upon race and ethnicity have fought throughout history. It's one of the most prevalent aspects of civil strife, of war, from the dawn of time until today. And for an American political leader to constantly categorize people by race or ethnicity and then attribute group character traits to them is not only the definition of racism, but it's so harmful to our country because we are very diverse racially and ethnically. We don't need our politicians to be kind of playing on the differences and continuing with those categories. We need our politicians to talk about being an American, not a black American, not a Latino American, not a white nationalist certainly, but being an American. And it's the ideals and principles of America that bind us together. And when our politicians play upon racial and ethnic stereotypes and racial and ethnic differences and then conjure up pejoratives about certain races and ethnicities, which is what Joe Biden has a history of doing, that will only pull us apart. We're going to talk more about Crazy Uncle Joe. Is he a racist? When we return from this brief commercial break, you're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Let's get back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. We're talking about our good friend Crazy Uncle Joe Biden. Is he a racist? He has a history of making racially charged statements, and more recently, I think back in the day, back in the 70s, I think he had the mental acuity to truly understand what he was saying and doing with his talk about the racial jungle that will result from integrating our public schools by race, and how he was afraid of that and wanted to keep his white children out of a racially integrated school, and how he lauded the work that he did with segregationist senators, Democrats, of course, from the South, who were segregationists and were working with Joe to oppose the busing. Remember that got Kamala Harris to her elementary school. You'll remember that from the Democratic debate. She's now a front runner to be Biden's vice presidential pick, which we'll talk about in a little bit, because this issue is starting to depress me about racism, and it is all the left thinks about. It permeates our culture today from the highest levels in Hollywood, in Washington, D.C., in the centers of power and influence in our country. They're so focused on race, and that I think it's so harmful to keeping our country together, because we are a racially diverse country, and to be constantly kind of playing on the fault lines is very problematic for the future of our country. But we'll take a few more calls, then we'll get into Joe Biden's mental acuity. So we'll hear from John from East Berlin. You're on the Mark Scaringi Show.
Hey, Mark, great show as always. Glad to be checking in with you. As far as Joe Biden being racist, I would say yes, he definitely is. And, when you assess his actions and his personal history and his political history and his assertions down through the years, I think it speaks volumes. One of the things is, if you have somebody that's shady like Sleepy Joe, is I usually question their integrity. Well, not only do I question his integrity, I question as to whether he has any, because of what he does. His son Hunter, that whole mess, you don't hear any more about that, and you heard very little from the liberal media about that. And the other thing I heard on Channel 8 the other night, somebody was doing a report on him, and they said he was a devout Catholic. Well, if his person constitutes a devout Catholic, I got to re-examine where I go to church. That's just the way it is. But his integrity, like I said, is really, really in question. And the thing that troubles me the most about all of this stuff is the information you just mentioned here before you put me on about how Hollywood and all these entities think about racism. Well, the problem with it is, no matter how rotten Biden or any of them are, the information that's distributed and disseminated makes it look as if, he's on top of the world. And some of those ads right now, because of the upcoming presidential election, of course, are being paid for. That I expect. But most of the media, most of the news media, will portray him, either by the sin of omission, by not saying, these folks a lot of times give opinions. They give their own opinions on before they report the news. And with Biden, regardless of what he says, it's going to come out in a positive way, and it's going to be disseminated, pretty in a gargantuan fashion across the entire country. And it's shows like yours that, I wish more people were listening to. I wish it was bigger, and so we could hear the truth. But that's not going to happen with Sleepy Joe for the most part with the media, and that's why we got to seek out the truth from information such as you provide.
Yeah, and thank you. And you're right. I mean, the media has covered up these deplorable statements that we've gone through them and analyzed them and reached a reasonable conclusion that reveal a racist tendency in Joe Biden's thought process. And the irony is the establishment, if you will, Hollywood and the media and Washington, D.C., and our betters who decide how Americans should think, they've been pillaring us for decades now, and they've ratcheted it up in recent years that America is systemically and inherently racist, meaning whites are racist against blacks and other racial and ethnic groups. And they point their fingers at Donald Trump and Donald Trump and the Republican Party, So that includes me and probably you and many listeners to this show. But the irony is they're elevating Joe Biden, who is obviously a racist.
Yep. He is.
And so what are you going to do? I mean, there you have it. And
what we got to do is be careful who we use as our source of information. Because I don't embrace hardly anything. I try not to watch the liberal newscast, but sometimes I do out of curiosity, and of course I have to take a sedative to relieve my upset stomach. But that's what we need to do. We need to seek out and not believe everything that comes in a nice, pretty electronic package or even in newsprint. That's what we have to do as Americans.
Well said. John, thanks for calling. Appreciate
that. Hey, thank you, Mark.
And,
thank you.
I think and thanks for calling. And I think what John is, we all need to listen to the Mark Scaringi Show to get our news, and I'm okay with that. And I think that would be a great idea. We should spread the Mark Scaringi Show all across Pennsylvania and all across the country to deliver the real news to the people of this great country of ours. Joe Biden had another interview, and I do want to get into the mental acuity thing because it's the funniest and scariest thing. But one more issue on race, and then I promise I'm not going to talk about it again. But Biden had an interview with Errol Barnett of CBS News. Barnett's interviewing Biden during the National Association of Black Journalists, their virtual convention. So I'll point out that group and its very title categorizes journalists based upon their race. So, oh my gosh, it never ends. In any event, the black reporter who's reporting from the national, or on behalf of the National Association of Black Journalists, who I guess, according to Joe Biden, they all think alike, the reporter asked Joe Biden if he had taken a cognitive test. Oh, that's right. This leads us into our mental acuity issue. And Biden's now infamous response, and you've got to Google it. I'm sure you've seen it on Fox News, and you may even see it in some of the mainstream media. Biden's response is, no, I haven't taken a test. Why the hell would I take a test? Come on, man. That's like saying you, before you got into this program, you're taking a test whether you're taking cocaine or not. What do you think, huh? Are you a junkie? That's Joe Biden's response. And Biden, and I'm sorry, I'm laughing at myself, and I'm about to accuse Biden of laughing at his own statement, which he does. Biden then goes on this laughter tear, thinking it's funny that he just accused the black reporter of being a junkie, when the reporter was just asking him, hey, have you taken a mental acuity test? Because you told us you did. I mean, this is a freak show. Joe Biden's response, that is. The reporter was great. The reporter was clear and articulate and was doing a great job. And it's Biden, this goofball, who becomes unhinged at having that question posed to him as to whether he took the mental acuity test, accuses the black reporter of being a junkie. All right, it's a strange, it's a sad, and a desperate response, but that's our Joe Biden. The interviewer revealed that Biden had lied. Biden, in prior interviews, had bragged about taking a mental acuity test, saying he takes one all the time. Well, we now know that was a lie. How do we know? Well, Biden himself just admitted he hasn't taken one. Biden then scoffed that Trump couldn't figure out the difference between an elephant and a lion, referring to Trump's mental acuity test that he actually took and passed. Well, Trump did not have any problem telling the difference between an elephant and a lion. Trump took and passed the mental acuity test that Biden's refusing to take. This is Biden's continued response to this question from Errol Barnett of CBS News. It gets worse and worse. And then Biden, he attempts to brag that he doesn't need a mental acuity test. And in doing so, he slurs his way through the brag. He says, I so forward to looking. I so forward to looking. So when you are defending yourself against a reasonable question that why haven't you or have you taken a mental acuity test when the whole country reasonably believes that you lack the mental capacity to hold the job, when you answer that question, you should probably try to use some basic grammar in your sentence and not say, "I so forward to looking." And then Biden started to repeat that old brag about how he would beat up Donald Trump in a fist fight, but then stops himself from saying that. Then went on to brag about his mental illness instead of fitness. And Biden says it twice. He's bragging about his mental illness. Now, he meant fitness. And again, when you're defending yourself against those who believe you should take a mental acuity test because you're obviously suffering from dementia, and in your defense, you cannot say the word fitness and repeatedly pronounce it as illness, then you've got a problem. You have a mental acuity problem. We're going to talk more about Crazy Uncle Joe when we return from this brief commercial break. You're listening to The Mark Scaringi Show.
Now back to the Mark Scaringi Show on News Radio WHP 580.
And welcome back to the Mark Scaringi Show, your place on the dial for constitutional conservatism. This is where we talk about the important political and legal issues of the day from the perspective of putting America first. And we're talking about Crazy Uncle Joe and his mental acuity. He recently defended, well, actually, the question was basically, have you taken a mental acuity test? Because Crazy Uncle Joe Biden in prior statements bragged about taking them, says he takes them all the time. And this interviewer from CBS News asked Joe about it, and then Joe finally admits, "No, hell no, man, why would I?" And then has a very difficult time answering or providing any further answer, which was really just a brag in a defense. It wasn't a substantive answer as to why he has not taken a mental acuity test. He starts to brag about beating up Trump in a fist fight behind the schoolyard, but then stops himself from figuring that that's probably not a good idea. And who, by the way, would believe that Joe Biden could beat up Donald Trump in a fist fight? No question that Trump would destroy Joe Biden in any fisticuffs, in any physical alteration. And then Joe Biden's defending his mental fitness by saying he has a mental illness. And it was just painful to watch. And so it's a lesson to all political candidates out there. It's a lesson to all of us out there. Whenever someone questions your mental fitness or your mental capacity, and maybe this has happened to one or two of our listeners out there, perhaps they've had a few alcoholic beverages. And I know that that wouldn't go. My listeners are drinking milk and orange juice, and they're very healthy. But somewhere out there, someone may have had a few too many drinks, and his friend will question him and say, "How many drinks have you had?" or "Are you okay to drive?" And your friend will always slow down his speech, and he'll try very hard to get the words out accurately and correctly. But no, I have not had too much to drink. And he'll try to get those words out in a grammatical form that fits the English language. And so that happens all the time. But for whatever reason, Joe Biden, when he's questioned about his own mental acuity, he can't even get that done. Slurs the speech, uses the wrong words. It's absolutely devastating, and it's very scary that this man, according to many polls, is the front runner. He's going to win the election in the fall when he clearly is not all there mentally. He obviously has mental deficiencies. He's obviously slipped and continues to slip mentally. Perhaps not physically, but mentally. And is this the guy that you want to be in charge of the nuclear codes in our country? Probably not. Yet the media, as John pointed out earlier, will continue to cover this up. They'll laugh about it. They'll turn it into a joke. But just like when you're out there with your friend and he's had 8 beers, and he is validly declaring that he's sober and can drive that car perfectly, everybody around him has terrible fear that he shouldn't get behind the wheel of the car, and they'll take the keys away from him. And that's what the Democratic Party should be doing. Its convention is in a week or two. They ought to change this candidate out and get somebody there who's all there. But, of course, they'll never do that. That won't happen. So we just have to leave it up to the American people to come to their senses. I think they are. I think they have already come to their senses. We have to leave it to the American people to do the right thing and reelect Donald Trump in the fall. Now, speaking of the Democratic National Convention, that I think is a week or two away now, and it's apparently going to be a virtual convention, Joe Biden has yet to choose his vice presidential selection. Now, CNN's reporting that Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer met with Biden, I think, last week to discuss the VP job. And I'll tell you, I think she'd be a much better choice than the others mentioned by the media. Obama's former National Security Advisor Susan Rice, United States Senator Kamala Harris of California, and Congresswoman Karen Bass of California. We talked about this on the show last week. I think the selection of Karen Bass, the communist, would be harmful to Biden's campaign. He already has the leftists, the socialists, the communists, Antifa on his side. So Bass, Congresswoman from California who is a communist, she brings nothing to his campaign. She'll scare away the independent voters and the blue-collar Democrats that Biden needs to win the election. Kamala Harris, United States Senator from California, she operates out of the same fundraising and political circles as Biden does, so I don't know that she brings much of anything. Biden will already win California, and he'll win it big. Kamala Harris doesn't bring much. Also, her years as a tough-on-crime prosecutor, particularly of drug offenders in California, well, that doesn't fit within the current prevailing wisdom and belief of the Democratic establishment today, the elites in the Democratic Party, the Democratic mayors and governors across the country in dealing with these riots. They want to go softer on crime. They want to go softer on drug crimes in particular. So bringing Kamala Harris, who has various prior public appearances and statements where she's tough on crime, I'm not so sure that fits well with the current Democratic Party narrative of being soft on crime. And then you have Susan Rice. She brings absolutely nothing but a lot of baggage to the Biden campaign. She was one of the chief unmaskers in the Obama administration. She was an important figure in the Obama administration's illegal and unconstitutional surveillance of the Trump campaign and in their attempt to derail Trump's candidacy in 26 and later their attempt to destroy his presidency. Rice will put all of that front and center in the fall campaign and just deliver a big softball to Donald Trump, who will hit that ball out of the park every hour of every day from the day she's chosen until Election Day. I think the Susan Rice selection will be bad for Biden, which is good for Trump and good for America, but I'm just giving a political analysis here. Now, Gretchen Whitmer, governor of Michigan, she would be my choice if I were advising Joe Biden. She is a woman, and that ticks off one of the boxes. Joe Biden wants a woman primarily, and then secondarily a black woman. Remember, Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, they classify and categorize individual human beings based upon their sex and their race. And that's the way the liberals and the Democrats think. Women are going to vote for Gretchen Whitmer because she's a woman, because apparently, according to Democrats, all women think alike. And it would be better if Gretchen Whitmer were black because, according to Joe Biden, it's on the record. It's It's not able to be contradicted. Joe Biden believes, with notable exceptions, that all black Americans think alike. So it would be better if Gretchen Whitmer were a black woman, because then, according to Joe Biden, he would get every black vote, with notable exceptions. But she's not. But she is the governor of a key battleground state that Trump narrowly won in 2016. In the general election, Donald Trump won Michigan by the margin of 0.23%, with 47.5% of the total votes over Hillary Clinton's 4 victory for Donald Trump in Michigan. So Michigan is going to be a key state. Pennsylvania is similar to Michigan demographically. It will also be a key state. If I'm advising Joe Biden, I would say get Gretchen Whitmer. Now, Whitmer's done a terrible job on the COVID-19 virus in Michigan. She locked down and shut down her state. Michigan reported the largest job losses in the nation in March and April, losing over 1 million jobs. Their employment plummeted by 22%. Governor Whitmer of Michigan, she wrought havoc all over that state, but the Democrats won't care about that. They'll care that she's female and in charge of a battleground state. And so that's who Joe should pick. We'll see who he does. That's all the time we have today on the Mark Scaringi Show. Thanks for listening. Tune in every Saturday here on WHP and WEJS at 1 o'clock. Thanks for listening. Enjoy your weekend.